And then, of course, as I said earlier, it's not a good thing from the perspective of federal agencies to have a continuing resolution, because it inhibits their ability to plan. You know, a lot of times they decide not to hire staff because they don't really know the budget, the size of the budget that they're going to end up with. So even though this is what's going to happen, I don't want to lead anybody to believe that that means that it's a good thing. And then the question will become, if this happens, and this is just my prediction, I don't know that it's going to happen, is will the new president actually come in and try to tackle fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 2010 at the same time? Because it's the fiscal year 2010 budget that OMB will be submitting in February, and that the new administration will be sending up changes to. But if there's a 6-month continuing resolution, they won't even have a fiscal year 2009 budget yet. So one option is they just say, well, we're going to convert the 6-month continuing resolution to a full year continuing resolution and just forget about it and focus on 2010. The other option is that they try actually to make policy changes for the rest of 2009 and 2010 at the same time. There's no good choice between those two. Because if they focus on 2009 and 2010 at the same time, that's an awful lot of moving parts. If they do a continuing resolution for the rest of 2009 and just focus on 2010, then there's all kinds of problems that they have to deal with in terms of they're essentially just continuing in place the policies in 2008 into 2009, which may not work for a lot of agencies. Okay. Couple other issues, and then in terms of transition, and then I will turn it over to you for questions. Budget reform. Here's what we should know about budget reform. Budget reform is what people propose to do when they don't want to do anything real. That is, there's a history that you reform the budget process when you know there's a problem. You don't want to solve the problem, but you want to say that you're doing something to make sure that somebody else is going to solve the problem later. There was a quotation from a past president of AABPA, and I'm a past president of AABPA as well. In fact, in this town, in the budget world, there's an ex-president of AABPA behind every tree, and the reason is because it's a one-year term, and and there are term limits, and the organization has been around a long time. So there was an ex-president of AABPA that said, budget reforms are proposals by losers who desperately want to become winners. You don't want to reform the budget process if the existing process is already giving you what you want. But if the process isn't giving you what you want, then you figure, well, if I reform the budget process, maybe it'll do better for me. So here are some budget reforms that have been out there and may be out there either in the presidential campaign or after the new president takes office. One is to reinstitute what were called the discretionary spending caps, which were limits on discretionary or appropriated spending, and this process called pay-as-you-go, which basically meant if you wanted to create a new entitlement or an expansion of an existing entitlement, or you wanted to cut taxes, that you somehow had to pay for that. You had to come up with some kind of offsetting reduction or increase in taxes, reduction in spending, increase in taxes in order to pay for that. And the legend that has developed is that the surpluses in the late 1990s that were created because of these changes, when in fact they were created because there was a consensus that we should do something about the deficits, and these changes were in effect a symptom of that consensus. That is, once you had the consensus, they put rules in place in order to sort of make that consensus happen. But these things did not cause the surplus to exist. And in fact, once we got to the place after September 11th, for example, when people no longer thought having a surplus was as important as doing some other things, they started violating these rules right and left. So if anybody says, and somebody is likely to say, and this is sort of what the McCain campaign means when it says returning to the spending limits of the late 1990s, the problem is that you need to have the consensus about what you want to do, and then these limits follow, as opposed to saying that the limits themselves are going to create this consensus. And just as an extra example of that, there was this process called Graham-Redmond-Hollings, which some of you may have